And the president is warning Russian President Vladimir Putin he could impose secondary tariffs on Russia if he is stalling a peace deal in Ukraine. Madeline Rivera live in Washington with more. Hey, Maddie.
Hi, guys. Good morning. That's right. President Trump is criticizing both Russia and Ukraine. The president saying he would consider imposing secondary tariffs on Russia if he believes it were at fault for not reaching a ceasefire deal in Ukraine. This comes after Russian President Vladimir Putin called for a transitional government to replace Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky.
I was disappointed in a certain way. Some of the things that were said over the last day or two having to do with Zelensky, because he considers Zelensky not credible. He's supposed to be making a deal with him, whether you like him or you don't like him. So I wasn't happy with that. But I think he's going to be good. And I certainly wouldn't want to put secondary tariffs on Russia, but if they were put on, it would not be very good for that.
But the president is also criticizing Zelensky, who he says is now trying to reverse course on a rare minerals deal. This was that agreement that the president and Zelensky were supposed to sign last month before a blowout in the Oval Office. After that spat, Zelensky said he was ready to move ahead with the deal, but the president suggests there may have been more snags.
I think Zelensky, by the way, I see he's trying to back out of the rare earth deal. We made a deal on rare earth. And now he's saying, well, you know, I want to renegotiate the deal. He wants to be a member of NATO. Well, he was never going to be a member of NATO. He understands that. So if he's looking to renegotiate the deal, he's got big problems.
The president also threatened secondary tariffs and bombing in Iran if a new nuclear deal is not reached. Todd.
All right, Madeline Rivera, thank you. Let's bring in former CIA covert operations officer Mike Baker. Mike, I think President Trump has a right to sound frustrated because for two sides that should really want an immediate end to this war, they sure aren't acting like it, Mike.
Well, yeah, that's if your assumption is that Putin really wants an immediate end to this war. And I don't think that's necessarily what's going on here. So, honestly, I'm not surprised that Putin's dragging his feet. He feels that he's got the upper hand. He feels he's got all the cards here. And so I'm not surprised at his stance, and I think it's more complicated than just both sides want a deal. Let's get to the table and cut a deal.
So what does Trump do to pressure Putin? Because I think you touched on the important point. You know, many scholars have said Putin doesn't want this thing to end. Putin wants this thing to drag out into 2026 and potentially beyond. So what is President Trump's next move to turn the screws on Vladimir Putin?
Yeah, well, I think that it's a great question that's really at the heart of all of this. And I think the answer is the economics of it all, right? Because most of those same people who feel that Putin's dragging this out will also agree that Russia's economy is shot full of holes. There's a lot of problems there. And if there is one thing that will bring Putin to the table, it's the sense that, that his economy is about to go completely under, right? I mean, he's being propped up essentially by the Chinese regime under Xi Jinping, to some degree, other countries, North Korea, Iran, India, to some degree, because of their buying of Russian oil and gas and then refining it and selling it on to the outside world. So I think we've got to go with more sanctions. Look, at the end of the day, the Russian energy sector is what keeps that country moving forward. They've got the GDP of a small EU country. And so if you put this squeeze on the energy sector in a meaningful way, because it really hasn't been meaningful up to this point, right, then, I think that's your best tactic here.
I think you nailed it. They don't have much other than their oil and gas. And if we do anything to compromise that, I think we do get the upper hand. So the ball is in President Trump's court in all likelihood when push comes to shove on that. You mentioned Iran. The president also addressing possible secondary tariffs on Iran after Iran ruled out negotiating directly with the U.S. on a nuclear deal. Listen.
We're going to make a decision on secondary tariffs on Iran based on whether or not they're going to make a deal. If they're going to make a deal, then we're never going to put secondary tariffs on. We're going to hope they have a great, long, and successful life as a country. I would prefer a deal to the other alternative, which I think everybody in this plane knows what that is. And that's not going to be pretty.
Mike, where does this back and forth go from here? Because, again, of all the stories we talk about, this one probably worries me the most, because if Iran gets a nuclear weapon, all bets are off in my estimation.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree. And look, at the end of the day, Iran is the regime. I mean, the mullahs, the IRGC, the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps, they are at the key. They're at the heart of all the instability and the trouble that we're seeing in the Middle East, right? I mean, they've built this terrorist proxy network around there, the Houthis, the Hezbollah, Hamas, the Islamic Jihad. And so, we have to deal with them. And you're correct. If they do complete their nuclear weapons development program, then they are that much more difficult to deal with. So again, I think what you're looking at is you've got to be talking about increased sanctions, this maximum pressure campaign. It actually has to mean things. We have to understand that these countries do have allies. And in Iran's case, it's that same group of countries: Russia, China, North Korea. They work together to try to bypass these sanctions. But we have to make them bulletproof, right? That's, again, the issue. There's a lot of discontent in the Iranian population with the mullahs and with the IRGC. So, the best thing that we can hope for ultimately at the end of the day is a change in that regime from within. And that will then be the only thing that brings stability to the Middle East. Everything else, getting a ceasefire with the Houthis, getting a ceasefire with Hamas or Hezbollah, it's kind of like putting lipstick on a pig, right? It doesn't solve the main problem.
Before we let you go, Elon Musk set to visit your old agency, the CIA, today for government efficiency talks. Based upon your experience there, Mike, how much fraud, waste, and abuse is there at the CIA?
Well, look, it's at the heart of it, it's a government organization. You can always argue that government bureaucracies, government organizations are going to be, to some degree, bloated. I think that's the nature of government, certainly big government. But also government organizations and entities and agencies aren't all created equal, right? The CIA is at the heart of the protection of national security interests. So my argument would be very, very careful. And Elon has said this, we have to be very careful about our cuts. Be very careful about how you progress through those cuts for an organization like the CIA. Is there bloat there? Well, you could argue, again, it's a bureaucracy. You could take the bottom 10%, and the agency tracks the bottom 10% performers on a regular basis. You can remove those right off the bat, and you've cut by 10%. So the agency understands the importance of working with the government, regardless of what administration it is. I know a lot of people would disagree, but at the heart of it, the CIA is an apolitical organization. It marches on regardless of what administration is in charge.
We will be watching. Mike Baker, thanks for getting up with us. We appreciate it.
I'm Steve Ducey.
I'm Brian Kilmeade.
And I'm Ainsley Earhart. And click here to subscribe to the Fox News YouTube page to catch our hottest interviews and most compelling analysis.